Hi, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar on staying connected, low-cost automated WhatsApp surveys. We look forward to presenting this new survey method with you today, and so thanks for joining us. We'd like to begin the presentation by acknowledging that the work of the Immigration Policy Lab at Stanford is primarily conducted on the traditional territory of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. To situate ourselves in the timeline of these webinars, today is our first webinar where we'll be introducing the WhatsApp survey method at a high level. After today's workshop, we will offer and release the public documentation that we've developed, which includes both a stepwise guide and code that can be used so that you can replicate this method in your own work. And if you're interested in learning more about applying these methods, we invite you to join us again at the same time next week, where we'll offer a technical demo with a live how-to on setting up WhatsApp surveys and sending them out as well. For today, we'll start with an introduction to the presentation and the method. We'll describe the system overview and the various parts that are necessary to set up WhatsApp surveys. We'll offer you information from 2 case studies where we've been applying this method, both in Colombia and in the United States over the last few months. We'll discuss some of the survey design considerations that are specific to delivering surveys over WhatsApp. And we will advance with conclusions and next steps and save about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for the Q&A. We did receive some questions in advance of today's presentation, and so we tried to embed those answers. And if today during the presentation you have additional questions, please submit them through the Q&A box and we will try to address those at the end. To begin, I'd like to introduce the Immigration Policy Lab, which is a social science research lab with branches at Stanford University and ETH Zurich that collaborates with research and practitioners to evaluate immigration policies, both in the US and abroad. We work with partner organizations in government, nonprofits, and service provider organizations to both design new programs and tools to support the integration of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers worldwide. We use an experiential model of social science that brings together students and faculty and practitioners at the same time to advance these policy methods. At the core of our work is partnerships, and so we're excited today to have 2 of our partners on the call, and we will be presenting some of these collaborations that we've worked on recently. Today, we'll have 4 speakers. Myself, my name is Jessica Wolf, and I'm a program manager at IPL. We'll also have Jennifer Fay, a program manager at IPL, Beza Tesfaye, who is the director of research and learning for migration and climate change at Mercy Corps, and Laura Wagner, who's the program manager for integration at the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. Now, the 4 of us represent a much broader team that has put together a significant effort to develop these survey methods and implement them today. So I'd just like to start by thanking many other collaborators, both at IPL, Mercy Corps, LIRS. We worked with IPA Colombia to distribute one of these surveys, and we received some software development support from partners at Slalom. So thanks to a much larger team that will be a part of today's presentation. So let's start by discussing the motivations for this survey method. First, traditional survey methods such as in-person or phone calls can have high costs, and these methods may not always be possible in certain contexts. For us at IPL, much of our research is with refugees and migrants, which means we need to stay in touch with people as they may be moving across borders or changing phone numbers. And because of our work with migrant populations, we've been focused on additional tools or alternatives to traditional data collection methods for a while. Now, this approach became even more important in this current moment when there was a need for rapid and remote engagement for both research and client outreach in the time of COVID-19. And finally, we wanted to leverage existing commercial communications technology. So those notifications that you might get when an order is ready for pickup or if a flight had been delayed. There exists technology for automating messaging platforms, so we wanted to see if we could adapt that to a research or nonprofit context. Now, traditionally at IPL, we would look to have a published peer-reviewed study out before we advance in broad dissemination, but we're sharing the survey method today while it's still in its development phase because we think it's very timely and important in this current moment. So we'll be sharing the results from applying this method in 2 cases, and we hope that you might find opportunities to use this in your own work as well. So with those motivations, we came to this opportunity of automated WhatsApp surveys. You'll see here on the left-hand side what it looks like to get an invitation to complete the survey, potentially like the survey many of you completed today as a part of this webinar. It indicates the name of our organization and it asks if you want to begin the survey, and it looks like any other WhatsApp conversation. So there's an opportunity here first for a low-cost survey option. You'll hear about one of our cases in the US where it costs just 32 cents in messaging fees to distribute a 19-question survey. The system can be automated so you can pre-design the survey questions with questions and branching logic so that it doesn't have to be manually distributed to each respondent. And finally, WhatsApp provides an opportunity for global reach and coverage given its high rates of use around the country and around the globe. I'd just like to highlight this low-cost portion. We had budget estimates from our partners at IPA Colombia, and they actually suggest that the data collection costs for a WhatsApp survey could be between 55 to 65% lower than asking that same that same survey over about a 15-minute phone call. Now, certainly this depends on the number of respondents, response rates, productivity rates, and survey wave, but there's really an opportunity for increased cost saving when this method increases in scale. So we'll start with a system overview. The process for designing and implementing WhatsApp surveys follows many of the same steps that you've probably followed to implement other surveys. You first need to access the necessary systems and set up the survey. Then you need to be able to send it and then collect the data from your respondents. Now, certainly there's an upfront cost in accessing the systems and becoming familiar with a new platform. But once this first step of accessing systems is complete, it's very easy to replicate and scale the survey. We'll start by discussing the systems that are involved in the WhatsApp survey. And to precede this, I'll just note that this will be a lot of detail and these may be entirely new systems to you, but as the documentation will be released later today, we have over 70 pages and steps and guides that will describe all of this more in detail. So the first system we need to access is the WhatsApp Business API. Now, I didn't know what an API was when we started these projects. So an API is an application programming interface. And basically what that means is that various systems can now talk to each other. So we have the ability to access WhatsApp and connect that with other systems. The WhatsApp Business API is different than the personal WhatsApp account you or I might be using ourselves on our phones. And it offers 3 primary benefits. First, it offers bulk messaging to more than 256 contacts at a given time. So that's how you can really send a survey out to a significant number of respondents. Secondly, it allows for automation inside of WhatsApp conversations. So that's how you can pre-design a survey and then have that conversation advance with each respondent. And finally, it allows for the data export of messages and metadata, allowing for data collection of your surveys. So these 3 primary benefits really elevate WhatsApp from a mobile messaging platform to a viable data collection tool. In order to access the WhatsApp Business API, you do need to have a Facebook Business Manager. WhatsApp is in the Facebook company family at this point, and so to verify your status as a business, you do so through the Facebook Business Manager. This can be done by sharing tax documentation or other official documents to verify your business. And it's just used for that purpose. Twilio is likely an organization you may not have heard of, but it's actually an organization that has been managing any of the mass messaging campaigns that you may have gotten on, reminders on text or email. It's a cloud communications platform that allows organizations to manage messaging campaigns. Now for us, Twilio is the service provider that allows us to access the WhatsApp Business API. So it's the operational interface where you'll be designing and implementing the survey. There are many organizations that offer this access to the WhatsApp Business API, and we specifically went with Twilio because they're very committed to supporting smaller organizations, especially nonprofits. They offer an Impact Service Corps program for nonprofit organizations with discounted pricing, as well as the opportunity to engage with volunteer software developers for support in a project, which is really critical for us as we started to develop this. The final system involved is the Google Developer Console. And this allows us to use Google Sheets that are password protected, both as a contact list and as the data collection database. So you'll see that's another API. And so that enables all of these systems to communicate together and effectively translate information between them. And again, this may be a lot of new information, but it's outlined in much greater detail in the documentation materials if you do have additional questions. The next step is designing a survey, which is similar to designing a survey in other platforms or experiences. It's important to designate your questions and the order you'd like them to be in. As the survey does happen over a messaging platform, it might be helpful to include identity verification questions to confirm who is completing the survey, in case you want to match their responses with previous or future responses for panel data, or translations to deploy the survey in multiple languages. And just as in other survey platforms, there's an opportunity to design the survey with logic. So you can have certain questions or multiple branches that go through the survey. So I'd like to show here a video of what it looks like to deploy a survey in WhatsApp and set it up in Twilio Studio. This video demonstrates a pre-designed survey in Twilio Studio and the user experience completing that survey on WhatsApp. Here I have Q1 or question 1 that I've typed out in the message body. It then advances to Q1 split, which is a logic block like you'd have on any survey platform, where I can predefine the accepted responses to this question, which I've listed as 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's an option to branch. I've sent all of my responses to the next question too. All of these parts are movable and can be linked and interchanged, however will work best for your survey. So let's see what it looks like on WhatsApp. Here I receive question 1, and I'm going to respond with the number of my answer. That response gets sent from WhatsApp into Twilio, and as a reply to Q1, it goes through this Q1 split. As we saw before, the number 1 is a matched response or an accepted answer for this question. So our survey advances to question 2. I'm going to respond to question 2 by saying, I don't know, which is not an accepted response for this question. So that answer gets sent back through WhatsApp to Twilio. It goes through this split and it set out no condition matches. At that point, an error message is sent to indicate that this was not an accepted response to question 2. And question 2 is sent a second time so that I can answer it again. So I hope that that demonstration just offered a high-level example of what it looks like to pre-design the survey and then run through it in WhatsApp. It really just looks like any other WhatsApp conversation, but all of this design and logic is set up in the background. Now, this is what was really exciting for us because we were non-technical users prior to this project. We didn't have any experience as software developers or anything like that. And so the ability to use this visual interface with drag and drop boxes These are actually building the background code needed to advance these conversations, but it's a lot more user-friendly than writing out that code originally. This video. Now, we need a way to send the survey, and so we use a contact list in a password-protected Google Sheet. In the way that we've designed the survey, we did have a pre-designated list of participants who had consented to this survey, and so we include their numbers and can then initiate the survey with that very first message to every phone number included on that list. There's an opportunity to monitor the status of outbound surveys in a pretty granular level. You can see if there are delivery failures or if messages in WhatsApp have been delivered, read. And then finally, each participant advances through the conversation in WhatsApp on their own, just as you would in any other WhatsApp conversation. And it happens simultaneously across all of the participants. Now, to collect the data, there's 3 types of responses that you may receive on your WhatsApp number. First, responses that are accepted by the survey logic. So those are those predefined accepted answers. Secondly, you will have responses that are not accepted by your survey data. And so those could be questions or requests for help. And there might be additional incoming questions to your phone number. Once people are aware that there's an opportunity to engage with this WhatsApp number, you may have people who are not in the survey sample sending in messages. And so we can send off those 3 types of responses to different platforms so that you can monitor and track all of them. Now, we've set this up in Google Sheets, but there is an opportunity to send it out to other platforms. And I just want to share a quick example of what it looked like with some of the responses to today's survey for those of you that may have taken it. So this is the Google Sheet with numbers hidden with responses that we got today. So you'll see that you could answer with a number or a written answer, yes or no, to the first few questions. We had these as numerical options, so there's minimal post-processing. Questions 4 and the close to the survey were both open-ended questions. And so we had the opportunity to collect this data, and then as your survey advances, you can quickly take that and analyze it as necessary. So that was a very quick overview. Again, additional details are available. But at this time, I'd like us to move on to the case study so that you can see what it was actually like to implement WhatsApp surveys in some of our projects. So I will invite Beza Tesfaye, the Director of Research and Learning for Migration and Climate Change at Mercy Corps, to present our first case. Okay, we're gonna settle how to unmute Beza. I see she's working on it. I will give a quick introduction to the case as she gets here, Beza.
I think I'm unmuted finally, thank you. Thanks so much, Jessica, and good morning to everyone from Washington, DC. I'm really excited to be on this panel and have the opportunity to share some of our preliminary results from this work in Colombia. And I really want to, before beginning, really thank IPL for their partnership on this project over the past year. So to begin, I wanted to tell you a bit about the motivation for undertaking this research. It stemmed from some previous assessments and ongoing programming that my organization, Mercy Corps, had been implementing in Colombia, really focused on the Venezuelan refugee crisis. As many of you know, the situation in Venezuela has sparked one of the largest refugee and migrant situations in the world, second only to Syria, with an estimated 6.5 Venezuelans having left their country by the end of 2020. 1.8 million of those displaced Venezuelans are in Colombia. So my organization, Mercy Corps, has been working in Colombia since 2006 with the local communities there, as well as displaced populations from Venezuela. And one of the key types of programs that we implement in Colombia is what we call multi-purpose cash assistance programs. This typically involves providing unconditional cash transfers to eligible households and individuals. So one of these multi-purpose cash assistance programs that we had ongoing in Colombia is known as Ven Esperanza, and that program has been sponsored by the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance at USAID. And the objective of this program is to provide emergency cash to an estimated 90,000 people, both vulnerable Colombian households, but primarily Venezuelans in Colombia. And we implement this project with about 5 other development organizations. And the regions that Mercy Corps is responsible for are La Guajira, Cesar, and Antioquia. So in terms of the research, we thought that the presence of this program gave us an opportunity to test the effects of providing cash on migration decisions. We know that there's a large body of research and evidence about the effects of cash on a number of different outcomes, including things like consumption and health and other well-being outcomes, but less so on questions of mobility and migration. Of course, when the COVID-19 situation emerged, we thought it would be useful to shift our focus and not just look at migration and mobility, but also look at a broader set of outcomes related to what we at Mercy Corps call resilience. So things that encompass employment, income, access to health and quality housing, things like that. So our identification strategy for this project was using the program's enrollment criteria for eligibility as a cutoff point for our regression discontinuity design. So essentially, the program surveys all individuals that are referred to Mercy Corps as potential beneficiaries and provides a score to each individual based on the information they provide. And we establish a cutoff that determines those that are considered most vulnerable and eligible for the program versus those that are below the cutoff and not eligible. So we had this identification strategy and we wanted to measure outcomes with people above and below that cutoff at 3, 6, and 9 months post-enrollment. And knowing that this is a very mobile population, and in fact, we wanted to study mobility as one of our key outcomes, we knew we needed a way to sort of maintain communication with people if they were likely to leave the location where we first interviewed them. So this led us to conversations about utilizing WhatsApp surveys for this research. So in the initial intake or enrollment process, we included a set of consent questions or messages to ensure that people, actually consented to receiving these additional WhatsApp survey questions from us in the future. And we also included our general demographic and household questions that establish eligibility. And then in our 3, 6, and 9 month post-enrollment surveys, we included questions about migration that we were interested in, as well as additional outcomes, as I mentioned, related to resilience. So far, we have surveyed about, or we had an initial sample of 2,600 individuals as part of this research across these 3 regions. But of course, since the program enrolls individuals on an ongoing basis, that number is also going to increase over time. So these are our preliminary results from our 3 rounds of our surveys with 3 different cohorts to date. Of the 2,600 or so individuals that were in our sample, about 2,200 of those individuals actually had a WhatsApp phone number or profile. So we were able to send a message to them. Of those individuals, about 76% actually responded to one message, at least one message. And of those individuals that responded to at least one message, 97% of them went on to complete the entire survey. So that was phenomenal. And then of those that completed the entire survey, we were able to verify the identity of about 90% of them to ensure that they were the individuals that we are indeed seeking to speak with. And this gives you a sense of the costs that were involved in this survey. And for us, it was rather cost effective. The average cost per 22 question survey was about $2.97. About half of that went to paying incentives. So each individual that completed a survey received 5,000 Colombian pesos. So it was quite cost effective, as I mentioned, far less expensive than what we typically spend when we do in-person surveys, and also less than a traditional phone survey. So just a couple of big takeaways for us. In addition to the fact that this was very cost effective, it was also a great way to collect information, and also if we wanted to share information in a very timely manner. We were essentially able to survey hundreds of individuals in a matter of a couple of days. So there's a remarkable opportunity to use this in other ways within Mercy Corps, including, for example, when we try to communicate information to the broader community through what we call our community accountability and reporting system or mechanism. So anytime we wanted to share information about what Mercy Corps is doing, or what our programs are doing, this is a really easy way of doing that. At the same time, though this was a great experience and overall, I would say a success, there were some initial challenges I think that we have to think about. One of those that I alluded to already was this challenge of confirming identity. And that tends to be a problem, I think, in situations where it is likely that households share a phone number, which was the case amongst the Venezuelan population that we were interviewing. And we did find ways to sort of identify an individual's identity, but I think it also raises some ethical concerns about privacy, you know, especially if the questions we are asking are sensitive, and there is this tendency to share cell phones, because a lot of times that the text history records the responses to these surveys. We just have to ensure that we're also maintaining the privacy of individuals through this process. So those are a few things that we have been thinking about, but overall it was a great experience, and I hope this tool is useful to other organizations as it has been to ours.
Thanks, Beza. So I think we're going to transfer to the next case with Laura Wagner, Program Manager for Integration at Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. We're working on a mute. I think she's going to come join us.
There we go. Success. Thank you, IPL, for giving us the opportunity to share about our experience using the WhatsApp survey. So as Jess said, I'm Laura Wagner. I'm a program manager at LIRS. LIRS is one of the 9 national refugee resettlement agencies in the US. So since 1939, we have been welcoming refugees into communities across the US through the Refugee Resettlement Program. So LIRS was excited to engage with IPL in testing out this technology for a couple of reasons. So the first was refugee client phone numbers and emails change quite frequently, but WhatsApp numbers tend to stay the same. It's also how we know that a lot of refugee clients choose to communicate. And so we were eager to try to meet clients where they're at in an accessible way via WhatsApp. Another reason is that previously LIRS did not really communicate or contact clients directly. Most of our communication is through our affiliate partner offices in the field. But this can be challenging when we want to send urgent resources or information in an emergency such as COVID-19 or natural disasters. It also is challenging if we want to engage clients who've been in the US for more than a year. So affiliates tend to stay in touch with clients for 3 months to a year. But if we want to measure integration, we need to be able to connect to clients over a longer period of time, which would require that direct communication. So given all that, we worked with IPL to develop a baseline survey. And it had two focuses. One is to understand the well-being of refugees during COVID-19 and how they had been impacted by COVID-19. And the second aspect was to include questions from the integration index to start to get evidence around how refugees were integrating in the US. So we sent the baseline survey via email, text message, and phone calls. And then during that survey, we collected WhatsApp and SMS contact info. And so once clients had opted in and we had their contact info, they are now receiving monthly 16-question surveys are being sent via WhatsApp to collect data on how they are continuing to be impacted by COVID-19. And so that's questions around employment and housing, health, education access, etc. Next slide. Okay, so these are our preliminary results. And so from those who opted in and are receiving WhatsApp, it's about over 780 clients. Our initial goal was to see to what degree we could conduct surveys at low or no cost. And so that meant both providing no incentives in the baseline or in the first month of the WhatsApp survey. And so that's something that we're continuing to monitor the response rates and see would low cost incentives boost client engagement or response rates, or to continue in this low or no cost method. We are excited about the response, the completion response once people started the survey. So that's at 81%, and it is representative of the baseline. So we are excited about that. We are also exploring ways that we could engage clients when they arrive in the US through this platform. And so the thought around that is that if they are engaged in surveying via WhatsApp early on in their resettlement experience, this could boost our ability to stay connected with a larger share of the population over time. When we look at cost, the total cost was 32 cents per completed survey, which is a very low cost in terms of the fact that as of right now, you know, refugee arrivals to the US are very low, but it's still thousands that are arriving. And if that number continues to increase, continuous survey and communication with them would have to be at a low cost in order for it to be sustainable. Some reflections on our experience so far. We are still working on the best way to engage and follow up and create a genuine feedback loop with the clients via the WhatsApp platform. As of right now, we are doing follow-up phone calls if they have a response that's a non-response or not a survey response, if they have a question or concern that's not actually related to the survey. And so wanting to be responsive to that and figuring out the best way to do that. We are trying to make sure that WhatsApp is applicable and accessible across the diversity of refugees that we serve. So we have slightly lower response rates from Burmese and Bhutanese communities. And so just looking at the diversity of refugees and making sure it's accessible for everyone. So the Twilio WhatsApp platform makes it easy to do various translation versions, which Jen will talk about, but there's still the cost to translating all the surveys. And so for this, it was 12 languages, and that doesn't even fully encompass all the diversity of languages of the clients we serve. Some successes, we are thrilled to have completed the baseline survey and prove that it was possible to collect this type of data at scale for a relatively low cost. And that makes it easy to convince LARS or other funders to support this type of data collection. Also, up until this results into this survey, our understanding of how refugees were faring was mostly based on anecdotal evidence from our affiliates. And so we're really excited to have this snapshot of how refugees are faring in COVID-19, and then we can prioritize our programmatic efforts accordingly. And we're just excited to kind of see how we continue to use WhatsApp and this technology to create a continuous engagement with our clients over time. And so that's kind of an overview of the LRS experience, and I'm going to shoot it over to Jen.
Thank you so much to Laura and Beza for presenting our case studies. It's really a testament to how important partnerships are to the work we do at IPL. So really appreciate that. My name is Jennifer Fay. I'm a program manager at the Immigration Policy Lab, and I'm excited to turn the webinar now to some additional survey design considerations in addition to the ones that we've started to present and that are detailed further in our supporting materials. And hopefully they begin to answer some of the Q&A that are coming in. So thanks for those questions and answers, or questions. All right, so there are a set of survey design considerations to keep in mind as you think about whether or not WhatsApp surveys and this method that we're presenting today is compatible with your context and appropriate for your intended participants. So the first is around consent. As with any research design, especially, obtaining the consent of your intended participants is extremely important, and that's sort of a built-in feature of using WhatsApp as part of this method. So WhatsApp does require that you receive active opt-in from your participants before you're able to initiate a survey to be sent to them. So an example of that is this morning, or when you registered rather, you hopefully did agree to receive a survey by checking a box on our IPL website on the registration page that said, I agree to receive WhatsApp messages from IPL Stanford. Now that by checking that box, you're providing that active opt-in. You know what kind of messages hopefully we'll be receiving, in what context, and from which organization. And that awareness for participants is really important. So building in that kind of active opt-in mechanism through a website or a baseline survey, for example, will be really important. It's also required to have your initial message that you're sending out as part of an initiated survey approved by WhatsApp. So to avoid any sort of spam-like messages and to adhere to WhatsApp's mass messaging guidelines. So there's another layer of protection to ensure that the message that you are sending out is approved, is verified, and is relevant to the survey or the reason why you're communicating. Next, related to that, accessing the survey is another design feature that you would consider before implementation. So whether or not you would like to be the one initiating the survey or sending it out to your intended participants, the way we did shortly before the webinar is a decision that you can make. And in that sense, it's invite only. We have received a list of consenting participants, contact information, and then we initiated the survey and invited them to be a part of participating. However, another option is to allow participants to trigger the survey themselves by accessing the survey or by sending a message and initiating, sending a new message to a WhatsApp number, to your WhatsApp number, and initiating the survey. So an example of that was at the beginning of this webinar, if you did not receive an initiated survey from us, either because maybe you didn't provide active opt-in or for any other reason, there is also a channel for you to submit any sort of message, incoming message to the IPL WhatsApp number, and then receive a survey that way. So you can do both of these options. You can keep it invite only, or you can keep it sort of an open hotline or channel communication for any participants who are interested in participating in the survey and self-selecting into it. The next consideration is question format. We've shown in the demonstration, the short video earlier, that there are different logic and branching that you would incorporate in your survey flow to designate which survey responses are accepted and which survey responses may not be accepted. For example, in a multiple choice question, if the question is, would you like to continue with the survey? 1, yes, 2, no. That's an example of a multiple choice question where you could designate only numbers 1 or 2 are accepted responses. That can make data post-processing and analysis a lot simpler, in that the data that you do collect from survey respondents is the final accepted number response, and is therefore pretty clean to begin with. There's also an option, of course, to ask open-ended questions that require your respondents to maybe text in something a little more qualitative in the WhatsApp survey. Excuse me. That is also a great option if you wanted more in-depth insight into their experiences or the response that they're giving. You can also hybrid these options in a multiple choice question where you offer an option for other, as you may have seen in our sample survey today, which gives you another option to collect qualitative responses. Human oversight as part of this method is extremely important. When we say automated, we certainly don't imply that this all happens on its own. That human oversight and the ability for participants of the surveys to connect to someone, a human, for support is really important, and also a requirement of the WhatsApp platform in using the API. One of the ways you can do that is to offer contact information to you or the research team or to the organization throughout the survey, especially when help is requested or needed, to inform them that this is the way that they can reach a human. Or you can also build in a feature where there's a human handoff within the Twilio studio to basically hand off the survey to a human agent who can then support in real time. So those are options that you could absolutely consider. That latter option may sound familiar to those who maybe have navigated a phone menu when calling a customer service line, for example, dialing different numbers to get to navigate different options, and then realizing you do actually need the support of an agent. You might say agent and then be handed over to a real human. So that's very important, especially in the WhatsApp context. These surveys really do feel like an interactive conversation, as you saw in the video, as you may have experienced yourself, because it does take place on a social messaging app as well, that there may be an assumption on your participants' end that there is a human on the other end of them engaging with them in conversation. So to build in human oversight and the ability for them to connect if needed is critical. Data privacy is certainly not to be underemphasized. It's extremely important when considering this method for your context and whether it's appropriate for your research goals, your program goals, and of course your participants and their safety and privacy. So there are three main things we'd like to flag here. First, absolutely check with your institution or organization's privacy, security, and confidentiality policies when it comes to handling data, storing it, collecting it, and especially for academic institutions and for any other organizations where institutional review boards and ethics boards are relevant, to ensure that you work closely with them to let them know your protocol, how you'll be collecting the data, what kind of data you'll be collecting, and work with them to see if this platform and the systems and the different linkages work for your institution's regulations. And finally, of course, each of these systems that we've mentioned, Twilio, Google, WhatsApp, Facebook, they all have privacy policies in terms of service that are relevant to your engagement with this method. And so to check the most up-to-date version of each of these platforms and see if they're compatible with your context is very key. So absolutely do those checks. One example I'll give in this area is that Google Sheets, for example, as part of Google Drive, is approved for high-risk data storage here at Stanford University. And given that compatibility within our institutional context, we were able to leverage it for this method. So absolutely check for your own context before proceeding. Finally, multiple languages may need to be offered in terms of increasing accessibility or the nature for your intended participants. So Laura mentioned the LIRS case study and that project. We did offer the survey in multiple languages, which was really important for a very diverse refugee client population. And so not to worry, you will not have to build each survey from scratch once you have translations, which can be very time consuming in Twilio. We have worked with our incredible developer to offer a translation service that basically supplements the Twilio Studio, and that it generates very quickly flows in additional languages if you have all the translations ready and organized in a specific format. And that makes a huge difference. From our experience, we've really benefited from this, in that when we make small updates to the original survey, we are able to quickly reflect those in all of the translated versions with this code. So highly recommend checking out that section if this is relevant to you, as many of you work with international and global participants and may have an interest in offering this in multiple languages. The documentation does cover this, as well as our GitHub repository, which has a pretty detailed README on this as well. Speaking of international participants and global usage, you may already be well aware that WhatsApp is a very, very popular social messaging platform. So for example, there are over 2 billion active monthly users in 180 countries as of July 2020, for example. And so that's a really testament to the fact that WhatsApp is really popular and hopefully very familiar. And it does consistently outrank other social messaging applications in terms of popularity and when we look at different sources as well. So we hope that points to the potential for broad applicability in your various contexts, and more reason to consider using WhatsApp as the platform for communication. Of course, in using WhatsApp, there are many accessibility considerations to keep in mind to determine whether this is right for, again, your use case, your intended goals, and of course, your intended participants. The first is, in terms of accessibility, both mobile phone ownership and the coverage of cellular data networks or wireless internet will be key in order to be able to use WhatsApp to begin with. And so checking and understanding whether your intended participants already use WhatsApp, are familiar with it, are in spaces where mobile phone hardware is available and used, all of that will be incredibly important for making this method appropriate. Beza also mentioned that there are contexts where multiple people may share one WhatsApp number or one device with a WhatsApp account on it, and they may provide that one WhatsApp number across different people as a way to contact them for the survey. And if that happens, it will be incredibly important to have that identity verification question in order to link back that respondent's data to perhaps baseline data you've collected or existing administrative data in order to understand who exactly is responding with that phone number. And it is an important research design consideration. And then finally, literacy and digital literacy is another important feature of is another important requirement to be able to access the WhatsApp surveys with ease and comfort. And so ensuring that your respondents would, again, be willing to and able to access this type of format is an important consideration. We recognize that WhatsApp surveys do have the potential to enhance existing research programs and engagement programs with participants and clients. However, considering and really thinking through whether this is appropriate for your context and your participants is a really important step before delving into implementation. Would like to wrap up here before we head into Q&A by recapping the sort of strengths of our approach, why we're so excited about it. We think there are quite a few different benefits that we've talked about throughout the presentation. It does minimize the time and resource costs. As we've seen, the cost per completed survey is quite low, and it really does benefit especially resource-constrained organizations or projects. WhatsApp is used widely around the world, and hopefully that increases the likelihood that this method works well for your context. Respondent access continuity is an important consideration, especially for migration researchers when we're trying to keep in touch with populations who may be on the move and change locations. Retaining WhatsApp numbers may increase our ability to keep in touch with them. remote engagement, especially, during the time of COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're living in, is another important requirement and may become all the more important for organizations who are thinking about how to safely engage with populations and respondents and participants. Business API technology, while it may be a new world for some of us, I think because it does really power so much of the private sector, we were encouraged to think about how this can be leveraged and appropriately used in research and nonprofit service contexts. And we hope that we will continue to see more case studies and implementations out there as well. And finally, it is really rapidly scalable in that once you set up the initial systems, it does really seamlessly deploy and can be redeployed, especially if you're conducting a panel survey and you're following up with your participants. That sort of ease of access on the sort of researcher or organization side of things, and the ability to send it out to so many people at once is a really great feature as well. So we really hope today's webinar has sparked some ideas for how you might use this WhatsApp survey in your context. Our goal in sharing this method and our approach is to make this as accessible and low cost for other researchers as well as nonprofit service providers, so that you may harness insights from your survey respondents to inform program strategy, better serve your clients, or develop new knowledge. So we look forward to engaging with you in conversation about this over the coming week and beyond. Next steps, as Jessica mentioned, we will be releasing some materials. Those will become available for early access to those who are in this webinar today. So thank you so much for registering. We'll release the manual, GitHub code, as well as the recording of today's webinar in case you'd like to refer back. And then I would really love to promote this upcoming webinar. 1 week from today, we will do a more deep dive, technical, hands-on demonstration of the systems in action, see how the linkages really work, see what it looks like to collect the data, to send the survey and things like that, and have more technical Q&A with our developer who worked closely with us on this project. We'll also release an academic working paper that will detail our case studies and results in more depth, in case you're interested, as well as a recording of that technical webinar, which hopefully will be a great resource for those implementing this method. This is a quick preview. I won't go too far into this. This is a preview of the different linkages we'll talk through next Wednesday. So please do stay tuned for that and join us next Wednesday to learn more about these systems in action. Last but definitely not least, I'd love to extend a huge thank you to each and every one of our partners. They've been absolutely instrumental in making these projects happen, our learnings possible, and setting up this whole method to begin with. LIRS and Mercy Corps, you've heard from them today on the fantastic case studies that we've worked with them on. We really value your partnership, your co-creation of all of these projects, and look forward to continuing working with you. Thank you so much. And then a huge thank you to the team we worked at Solemn, particularly a developer who's just really helped create this fantastic code for replication purposes. We hope that you will use it. For the project with Mercy Corps, funding was provided by the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, awarded through Innovations for Poverty Action's Peace and Recovery Program. So thank you all to all of these partners and beyond. We're very grateful. I'd love to pass it over for Q&A. Recognize we have very limited time, but we will again have that technical demo. So please, we're happy to answer more in-depth questions about design and things like that there as well. And of course, stay in touch with us at IPL and learn more about our work at immigrationlab.org. I'll pass it over to Jessica for a quick moderated Q&A.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks all for joining and sending in questions. We did receive many questions. I hope we were able to embed responses to a few of them in the presentation. I'd like to prioritize 3 topics right now. First, accessing the WhatsApp Business API. Second, survey design choices. And then finally, conducting surveys in multiple languages that may use different characters. So first, you do need to provide business documentation to access the WhatsApp Business API. So for researchers or nonprofit institutions, you need to go through your organization's official documentation, and that is what can be used to verify your business. There's additional detail on this verification process in the documentation manual, which will be released today. In regards to survey design choices, we received many questions about how to format accepted and non-accepted answers, if there's an opportunity to engage with IVR or interactive voice response. The answers to both of these are yes. So it is a researcher's choice to define what accepted or non-accepted answers are. You can choose numerical responses, open-ended. There is an opportunity in Twilio to design the survey using IVR instead of text messages. So these opportunities are available to you. Again, we shared a lot of content in this presentation, but it's fully described in the documentation manual, which you'll all receive after this presentation. And then just for our last question here at the end, we had several questions about the ability to send a survey in other languages and using other characters. So I'd like to send that over to Jen, who sent out a survey in multiple languages for the US case with LIRS.
Absolutely, and quickly, I can't speak to all special languages with special characters and things like that, but we were able to send the survey in Arabic. I did see a specific question about that, and Twilio is compatible with right to left language. So is the code that supplements and provides that quick flow generation. So we hope that you'll look into that documentation and be encouraged by the fact that we were able to send it out to send out surveys in many languages.
Thanks, Jen. So recognizing that we came up right to time, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really pleased to see you all join in the excitement and potential additional applications for automated WhatsApp surveys. If you are interested in additional detail on this, we will be emailing out the documentation and code that is publicly available for other organizations to replicate. And if you do have questions more about the technicalities of setting up WhatsApp surveys and deploying them, we invite you to join us at the same time next week, where we're going to have a live demo that goes more into some of these details about setting up surveys, defining accepted answers, etc. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you all in the future. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.